Thank you. Go ahead to the next chart. So I'll go through the slides. I understand we have about till 2 o'clock. So as I'm going through, if you have questions, feel free just to jump in, interrupt. We can have discussions. It's not critical that I get through all the slides. It's more what information is helpful to you guys and what questions that you have. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So when we talk about diversity at the SES and the higher levels, if you look at this chart that I have, you'll notice some patterns. And what I have up there is AAPIs, Asian American Pacific Islanders on the left, all the other minorities combined in the middle, and the white so the majority group on the right. And if you click on the next, so the pattern that you'll see is when you look at the majority group, you'll see the representation steadily increasing as the levels go up. All right. Yeah, I don't think that's a big surprise to anybody. If you look at the other minority groups, you'll see the representation actually sort of decrease as you move up in levels. And this holds true. This only shows GS13, but if you take it further down, I think it holds generally true. But if you look at the AAPI chart, you'll see that the representation actually increases as you go up, and then there's a fairly big drop when you get to the 15 and SES levels. So we have about 6% representation in the federal government workforce for APIs, but only 3% at the SES, right? Which is about half. And historically, that's the highest it's ever been. So we're doing better, but still, if you look at the numbers, and when you look at barrier analysis, the numbers are just an indicator, right? So you want to dig further behind on why that is. But certainly, excuse me, that seems to indicate there is an issue there, and what are the reasons, and what can we do about it? So go on to the next one, please. So AAGEN, Asian American Government Executives Network, I mean, we're there for a very simple purpose. Our mission is to help more AAPIs get to the senior levels of government and break that bamboo ceiling, and just to help the people that are either already in the federal government or thinking about coming into the federal government get to the SES. That's basically the mission. And it's a nonprofit, it's nonpartisan, and it's 100% volunteers. We don't have anybody in the organization that's hired staff. So all the hours spent are volunteer hours. I like to joke the office hours officially for AAGEN is 1 a.m. through 4 a.m. because that's when all the emails start flying, and that's where we spend most of our time. So that's what we're here for. Next slide, please. And some of the things that we do, we just had our leadership conference. Did anybody attend that by chance? No? All right, you guys got to look out for that next year. And we did have a record attendance. We had over 400 attendees. We also have a awards banquet, and we had about 225 people at the awards banquet. So that's something that we do every year. Something that we started to do this year is the SES development program that we kicked off in March. And that has the support of the White House Initiative for APIs, OPM, and EEOC. So we sort of worked together with them. I can't use the word partner because I don't like the word partner, but we worked with them, kick off the program. And at the beginning, we try to get the word out, but anything that you first start, the word doesn't get out completely. How many of you have heard of this? Okay, some. Like I said, the word doesn't get out completely. Yeah. But hopefully by next year, when we do it again, more people would have heard of it and will apply. But even with it being the inaugural year, we had 100+ applicants, and we only opened up the GS15 level mainly because we wanted to match each candidate we select with a SES mentor, and we only had so many SES resources that's available, because if you look across government, there's about 210 AAPI SES members. I'm not sure, we don't have a list. That's just based on stats. So we're trying to get as many of them involved and engaged. Let's see. So that really, everybody that's gotten to that level can become mentors and role models and help pull somebody else up, right? Because if each of us pull one person up, then we can double our numbers, and there we are at 6%. Simple math. But this program, we weren't quite sure when we kicked it off how many applications we were going to get and the quality of the applicants we were going to get. So with over 100, and most of them very high quality, we're very happy with the candidates, and we went through 3 panels to select down to the 20, and we actually had some challenges in getting that number down, because there were definitely more that we would have liked to accept if we could have. But it's the first year, we didn't want to bite off more than we can chew. We wanted the program to be a success. So that kicked off, and they had 2 training sessions already. They've been paired up with their mentors. We had them sort of look at the available mentors, look at their bios. They even talked with them and sort of did a mini interview just to see who they're comfortable with, who they have more in common with and can learn the most from, and then give us the sort of their top choices, and then we match them up. Some mentors could have said more than one. Some say, hey, in my schedule I can only do one. So most of them got their top choice. Some had to end up go with the second choice. So that program is very successful. It's ongoing, and we're starting to get more visibility and credibility behind the program. And the credibility really is, I would say, a key factor, right? Because in reviewing, and I review each of the 20 candidates that we selected, I would say most of them are qualified today. They have very great depth and breadth of experience. They wrote very well-written ECQs, and they're high quality, go-get-them type of candidates. So really it's getting them in front of the people that are in position to hire, give them the visibility, give them the credibility, which is what we're trying to do as part of the program. Something that's not on there, we also, and let me know if you're interested, I can send you the link. We're doing a survey to basically figure out for people in the federal government what kind of barriers and challenges they're facing as they're advancing in their careers, so that we can, as I said at the beginning, the numbers indicate that there's a drop, but we're not sure why the reasons are, and we want to get some data to help us pinpoint that. So maybe I can send you a link to that survey, and the more data we get, the better. And it doesn't have to be just APIs. I think for all federal government employees, we want to compare and contrast the different challenges that different groups encounter, right? So that would help us. Next slide, please. I'm not going to cover this one more in too much detail, but this is really, if you look at the services that AAGEN is trying to provide, and again, we're all volunteers, so there's only a limited amount of resources, but looking at the whole cycle from recruitment all the way to advancement, what are the things that we can do to help agencies and the employees within those agencies to get there. And then you'll see on the left side, that arrow is the barrier analysis that we really need to do, or the agencies need to do all the way through. And then on the right, you'll see, it's hard to see the color codes, but the blue ones are what we've already put in place. The green ones are things that we're starting to work on. The red ones are things that we still want to do that we haven't done yet. So that just gives you an idea of what AAGEN is about and what we're doing. Okay. Next slide, please. So in terms of how do you get to the SES level, right? There's no one path to SES. In fact, we had a panel for our SES development program candidates last week, and we had 5 SES members on there, and they all took different paths to the SES. So if you just click a few times, some people move straight up through agency, and they stay in one agency and just slowly move up. You have people that sort of jump around in the different agencies, and unfortunately, I think in the government system, sometimes that's the faster way to move up. That if you wait for a position to open up within where you are, it takes longer sometimes, right? So if you jump, and you might end up back at your own agency again, but by jumping around, sometimes you get there faster. There are people that come in as sort of the mid-career level from the outside and then move up from there. And then there are the people like myself and Asif, that came directly into the SES, which I don't know what you were told, but when I came in, I was told, how'd you do that? You're under 40, you're a minority, you didn't have any government experience, and you came into the SES job. Who did you know? And my answer was, I just went through the interview process. It was just another job application. It really wasn't about, and in fact, when I went to EPA, I didn't know anybody there. But I continue to hear almost 10 years later now that that's very uncommon. And I think we need to do a better job as government agencies to help get the qualified people out there in the private sector into government, right? Because there are many out there, and right now in this economy and unemployment, there are many that are now interested that may not have been interested a few years ago, but the process is just so unwieldy and complicated. Even though OPM's trying to simplify it, and they have, it's still, compared to the private sector. I actually worked for careerbuilder.com before coming into government. And there, you have your resume ready, you put it into the database, you do a search for jobs, you find something that looks interesting that you might be interested in, you hit submit, and you're done, right? The application that the first one I wrote coming into government had 5 ECQs, of course, and 6 KSAs that I had to respond to. It was 27 pages long, and it took me 3 weeks full time to put that thing together because one, I didn't understand at that time the government process. I want to make sure I dot all the I's and cross all the T's so it doesn't get sort of rejected just by HR on a technicality. And 2, the ECQs, guess what? You have to be almost an author to write good ECQs. And then on top of that, you have the KSAs. So the first one literally took me 3 weeks full time. And after I put so much effort into it, I said, all right, well, I might as well take advantage of this and apply to some other government jobs. And each one after that took me about 1 day full time to do. All right, and that's the process. And I think we need to help people that haven't gone through that process, hold their hand a little bit, help them out so that they're not scared and they're not dealing with some myth in terms of what they've heard or their perceptions of what government is like, and we can get more quality people in the government, which should help everybody overall. All right, but that's the path I took. Next slide, please. So give you some background on me. All right. As indicated, I came to the U.S. when I was 8, and I didn't speak any English. I think I knew the ABC and 1, 2, 3, and that was it. I came and lived on Hollywood Boulevard, right behind Mann's Chinese Theater, or I guess now it's from Chinese Theater. And I was there for 1 year, then I moved to the East Coast, right? And I still believe if I had stayed there, I could have been the guy that jumped out of the trunk and hangover. Instead of the other guy. But I moved to the East Coast to about the Northern Virginia area, and then after about a year and a half, my family moved to Lynchburg, Virginia. Who's heard of Lynchburg? All right. When they say Virginia is part of the South, all right, up here is not it. Okay, Lynchburg is part of the South. So I'm actually a Southern boy. I like grits and all that good stuff. But Lynchburg had no Asian Americans. I was the only Asian American in my entire high school. And all the way through high school, usually when you come at 8, you adapt fairly well. I didn't adapt that well in terms of fitting in. Throughout my whole high school, I spoke very rarely. I had 2 neighbors lived right next door, 2 sisters. One was 1 year ahead, one was 1 year behind. Rode the same school bus with me for 2 years. After 2 years, they thought I was either dumb, like can't speak at all, or didn't speak a word of English, because they never heard me speak in 2 years. Okay, so it was definitely a transition, and part of it was just getting used to the environment, getting used to the culture, and part of it is definitely the cultural differences and upbringing. And if you look at, when you talk about diversity, right? Diversity, just the AAPI community has over 50 different ethnic backgrounds. So when I was talking a lot in the APA Heritage Month celebrations, and when we talk about heritage and culture, like, well, how am I supposed to talk about so many, and I don't know all the diversity enough to tell people, but I tell a little bit about my family, and just within the family you have enough diversity, right? My parents came from China to immigrate to Taiwan, and even though they've been here in the States for, 42, 43 years, they still don't speak any English. They're actually illiterate in Chinese as well. They never had any education, so they can't read or write. So my mom always says she's blind, she's deaf, and she has no legs because she can't speak or write, she can't understand the language, and she can't drive cars. So everything my parents do relies on either the family, children, or friends of the family. So you have them, and then you have my brothers. My oldest two brothers went through apprenticeships when they were in Taiwan. All right, and apprenticeships, it's not like what you see in the movies. It's hard. You're basically almost like an indentured servant in that you're doing labor to learn a trade, right? To learn a skill. And the reason my parents did that was because they really couldn't feed them, right? So they had to send them out to learn a skill, and hopefully they can apply that trade and get jobs and whatnot. But they had a rough life going through that. So you have that side, and then you have there's 6 children. My parents have 6 children, so I'm the youngest, by the way. And we went through, sort of different experiences. Each of us came here at a different time, except for my sister and I, which we came together, but it's like a year apart when we came over. So my sister and I are the only ones that got a college education here in the States, and nobody else did. But even so, I worked in the stereotypical family Chinese restaurant since I was 12. I washed dishes, and all the way through high school. When I went home on the school bus, if I didn't go in to help, I would feel guilty. But of course, as a kid, you don't feel like going in to help, so I would let fate determine whether I go in to help. We would pass by a red light in front of the restaurant, and if that light was red, then I would get off and I would go help. And if it was green, I would just sort of put my head down and I would go home. And that's during the school days. Weekends, there's no question. I'm in there helping because it's busier. So even if you look at the family, there's a lot of diversity, right? And my kids, of course, was born here, grew up here, going to school here, so they don't know really the meaning of a lot of this stuff. It's totally different. So when you talk about diversity, I think it really gets down to the individual, right? You have to look at the individual, understand them as a person, understand the sort of perspective that they have, because each of us look at the world in different color lenses, and it's based on the experiences that we bring, right? So culture and heritage and diversity, I don't think it matters where you're from, what minority group you're in. It gets down to understanding that person and dealing with that person so that you can understand where they're coming from, and then hopefully you can work together better. So that's sort of my diversity spiel from the last month. So when I went to college, that's when I opened up a little bit, because I saw other Asian Americans that I didn't see in Lynchburg. So every time I saw an Asian American, I would go up to him and introduce myself and say, "Hey, are you Chinese?" I said, "No, I'm Korean." So that's close enough. So I ended up meeting a lot of people, and I started the Chinese American Society, which actually still exists at Virginia Tech after about 30-some years. So that's still there. But that's where I gained some comfort, and I started hanging around with this group, really more for social than anything else. But that sort of became my home base where I was comfortable. And from that home base, I could veer out into sort of some other areas that I'm uncomfortable with. And I'll talk about getting out of your comfort zone. And then when I veer too far out, I would go back to my sort of home base and recharge a little bit. So I think that helped me a lot in terms of getting from where I was to where I am now. All right. And by the way, I'm a strong introvert. I'm like an off-the-charts introvert. And I tell people that these days, and they don't believe me. It's like, oh, no, you're not an introvert. It's like, no, I'm off the chart. But the reason I'm telling you some, a lot of the background is because when you talk about diversity and when you talk about sort of getting out of your comfort zone, sometimes you look at people and say, oh, they just do that naturally. They're born with those skills, or they're good at that, and I'm not. And that's not the case. It is something that improves with practice. It is something that if you take some risk out of your comfort zone and do, you'll find yourself being able to do. But it's not like it comes naturally to me to come here and just speak in front of you. I hated that, and I still hate it, but I do it. So with practice, you can do that. And I think when we talk a little bit later about cultural differences and how you move up in the ranks, that's an important factor. You have to be able to do that. You have to communicate. You have to have good interpersonal skills. You got to have good presence. You got to get up in front of people, and those traits become more and more important as you move up in the ranks, right? Whereas when you first start out, it's more about the technical skills, right? But later on, that's not an issue. And a lot of times, well, how come that person got promoted and I didn't? Because I'm better at that than that person at whatever technical areas that you're working in, but that person may be better in these sort of softer skills, which are harder to measure, but that's what people look at. All right, so hopefully my background will give you some encouragement. Hey, if that guy can do it, then I can do it. All right. Now, after Virginia Tech, I went through the interviewing process, and I was terrible at interviews too. I remember one interview, they ask you what's known as a standard question now, right? Well, what's your greatest strength? I thought about his greatest strength. I said, I'm a practical person. Right? And after the interview, I'm like, what kind of answer is that? Who cares that you're a practical person? But that was the best I can come up with at the time. And I was very nervous going to the interviews. When I talked with people and I came across nervous. These days, I love interviews. I sort of changed the whole paradigm in that I look at interviews as I'm going in to interview them to see if they're the right company for me, the right organization for me to work for, right? As opposed to them interviewing me and am I the right person for them. And by going into it with that perspective, I found that I'm a lot more interested in that organization because I'm trying to find the right match for me. I do more research. I ask more questions, which comes across as I'm more prepared, more interested. It's just the whole dynamic is different. And I don't even go into it worrying about an interview. I just go into it, hey, I want to find out more about these people in this organization. So nowadays, it's all right, fine, let's interview. No problem. So after that, I ended up going with some consulting firms, Accenture, Pricewaterhouse, and through that experience, I think helped me a lot because I still don't know how I ended up a job with Accenture the way I was interviewing at the time. But once I got the job, I would go into different projects, and every project is like starting all over again because you have different people you work with, different industry in terms of the client, different businesses, different issues that you have to solve, and different bosses even from within the company because every project you get assigned a different manager or partner. So you really have to work with people and learn really quickly and try and do, because you're being paid like $300 an hour to solve a problem. People are looking at you every minute. It's like, all right, what am I paying you for? You got to come up with something, really quick. And that experience, I think, helped a lot. And then in 2011, I became the chair of AAGEN, and I think the AAGEN experience has really helped a lot. Our theme in the conference this year is leadership in an austere environment. And if you look at working for an organization like AAGEN, when it's all volunteers, all senior people that are opinionated, that have their way of doing things, and you're not paying them, so you can't really say, all right, you go do this, you go do that. You really have to work with people and get them together to try to achieve, and you got to put that mission out there and get them to march and work with each other to get things done. And that's really a challenge. But I think through that experience, I've certainly learned a lot from that. You know, when you look at the ECQs of leading people, leading change, business acumen, a lot of times we're nonprofits, so we don't have a lot of resources to work with. Right? The SES development program I talked about, by the way, we didn't charge the agencies anything or the attendees for attending that. Right? If you look at candidate development programs, they're $23,000 per person that they sent to that. All right? We're offering that no charge to the agencies. Now, if they come from out of town, they'll pay for travel and per diems, things like that. So when you look at business acumen and trying to do things with no resources and these budget situations we're under currently, well, we're able to kick that program off and not charge anything and offer the training. So you're still able to get things done. Building coalitions. I mentioned the White House Initiative, OPM, the EOC, and I mean every day I'm out there working with other people and building new partnerships. So within AAGEN, I could fill up the ECQs just from the 2 years experience in AAGEN, all right? And it would be valid, because when you look at ECQs, it doesn't have to come from your job, right? You don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again for each ECQ, but certainly experiences from outside are valid. So, when we talk about ECQs, when you don't have opportunity to do certain things at your job, you might want to look outside your job for some of those opportunities to fill in those gaps. All right, so enough about me. Let's go on. So when we talk about SES, right, I ask, do you want to be SES? How many people here who are not SES yet want to be SES? Only one.
Why are you guys here?
Oh, there's another one over there? All right. See, maybe this is why the numbers are low. Nobody wants to be an SES. Now, when I first started, they sent me to FEI, right, the Federal Executive Institute, the Leadership for Democracy class, which they send people who are aspiring to SES and some people who are already there, like I was at the time. So when I went there, it was about a 1-to-8 ratio between SES and non-SES, mostly GS-15s. I was fairly new to the government. I asked, I was just assumed that those people wanted to be SES. Guess what? Most of them didn't want to be a SES. My first question was, well, why are you here? Why are you wasting the government's money if you don't want to be SES to be at the training? But then I was trying to find out why is it that they don't want to be an SES. And three things really came out time and again. And I think all of them are myth. One is, well, you don't get that much more money for being an SES, right, than what I am now. We all know in the government, money is not the major thing, right? You don't get a lot of money. You can look at executives in the private sector; they get a lot more money. So certainly, it shouldn't be the primary driver. However, if you compare GS-15 to SES, the cap for SES is definitely higher than the cap for 15. It's about $25,000 higher. All right. So while that may or may not be a big difference depending on how you look at money, it is significant enough where there's a difference. And if you look at bonuses, GS bonuses this year have been capped at 1%, right? Or the average should be 1%. And the SES bonuses this year, the average should be 5%. Yeah, and this year is low for both, but still that's significant difference, right? So there is enough, I think, money difference than what people think. The second thing people say is, oh, wow, that was worth it, because when you're SES, you got all this additional responsibility, and you got to work so much harder, you have the work-life balance. And out of the 20 people in the SES development class, I got asked the same question. We had an SES panel, and we just basically sat there and answered all the questions. And one person asked, is it worth it to be a SES? So I sort of turned the question around and said, all right, how many of you have SES as bosses? And most of them did, right? And I said, all right, if you're honest with yourself, how many of you think you work harder than your boss? And about half of them raised their hand, right? So then I posed the question to them, is it worth it not to get an SES? You're working harder as just 15. And I think as a SES, generally, not always true, but generally, you have more control over your realm of responsibility. Do you have more responsibility? Yes. All right. But usually, you're the boss of that area. They say work smarter, not harder. You have control over the priorities you set, the mission and objectives that you set, how you delegate, how you allocate the resources. So if you're an effective leader, you can get things done without having to have your whole work-life balance suffer. And as a GS-15, you may not have as much control of that because you're reporting to the boss, who, if they're good, they're going to make you do all the work. So I think that's a myth. And just because you're SES doesn't mean you're going to work harder or you're going to give up your life for the job. And then the third myth that was common was, well, SES is on a sort of a different program, and because of this whole mobility thing, they can pick you up at any time, move you somewhere else, a different location or a different department, and you would have no warning, right? You can be picked up and moved to Alaska, theoretically, right? Well, theoretically, that might be true. But practically, I would say if you're a good performer, they're going to come and talk to you about any sort of potential changes and see if you're in line with is that what you want to do? Does that make sense? And you're going to have that discussion. They're not just going to pick you up and move you somewhere, unless you're a bad performer, right? They might do that if you're a bad performer, but guess what? If you're a bad performer, you got many other issues to worry about than just that. So do you want to be a SES? I think a lot of people say no because of those things. Now, of the people that didn't raise their hand, is that true? Or were those things some of the reasons? All right, so reconsider, okay?
I think when you said 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. emails, that kind of...
Well, that's AAGEN.
I know, but it's all SES.
That's not SES, all right? If I didn't do AAGEN, I'd be sleeping like a baby 1 a.m. through 4 a.m. Right? So the question is not, do you want to join AAGEN? That's a different question. All right, but... So I would say look at the realities and don't be blinded by the myths. All right. So next slide, please. How many of you have tried filling out ECQs? All right, we got one. But you didn't want to be an SES.
Yeah.
You didn't even want to be an SES.
I raised my hand like this.
Oh, okay, one of those. Not quite sure. I tell people, regardless of what level you're at, I don't care if you're GS7, all right, try filling out the ECQs. Just for fun, right? If you have a Saturday afternoon, you have nothing to do, try filling out the ECQs.
Yeah. Like, how long did it take you to do yours again?
Well, that's why you have to do it now before you need to, right? Because I needed to at the time. But because, a lot of people will ask, well, what is a leader? Or what's the definition of a leader? And you'll get different answers from different people, right? But guess what? In the government, there's a definition of a leader clearly spelled out, and that's in the ECQs. This is how government defines leader, right? Now, is it wrong? Is it right? I don't know, but this is the criteria. And if you look at the OPM website under /SES, you'll see the 5 ECQs, and you'll see very detailed descriptions of what each of those entail. So even if you don't want to be a SES, I'm assuming you do want to advance in your career, right? How many people are just 7s are totally happy for the rest of their life? All right, nobody. All right. So if you start looking at ECQs, one, you understand it. All right. Two, you get a better definition of what your bosses are supposed to be like. Right. But three, once you start trying to fill it out, you're going to start seeing gaps on, I don't have anything that I can fill in here, or yeah, I have a little bit of experience here, but it's really, I can't say much about it. And that becomes your roadmap on how you advance in the government, right? Because you might have one area that you have lots and lots to say. Guess what? You now need to get out of your comfort zone out of that area and expand to the other areas. And where there are the gaps, you need to start looking for opportunities, whether on your current job, details, experiences outside government, in your church group, whatever, right, to try to fill in those gaps. And that's going to help you advance, because that's what the government is looking for in terms of where you need to be eventually, right? So even if you stop at just 14, some of those same qualities still exist. It's not, those qualities are not just for SESers, right? And you're not going to all of a sudden, oh, okay, now I want to be a SES, boom, develop it. You got to develop them along the way, right? And if you're 13 trying to get to a 14, those factors come into play, all right? So go look at the ECQs and try to start filling it out. All right, next slide, please. Oh, and yeah, you notice there are no technical skills listed, right? And I'm a CIO, so when I talk technical, I'm not talking about IT. I'm talking about whatever your job is, the technical, if you're a lawyer, the technical nature of your job, you probably know it very well, but guess what? It doesn't come into play in terms of the ECQs. So it's all about really these other skills, all right? All right, so I also have this other chart that illustrates that. I call it the 3 Ps, all right? The people, process, and the politics, okay? Those are the things that you need to really worry about outside of your technical, all right? That the process, especially within the government, you have to understand whatever it is you do, you still need to understand a little bit of the HR process, the budget process, the acquisition process, and whatever it is that your agency does, right? Maybe in jail is auditing. Right? You have to understand the processes, because I've found that in my time in the government that if you don't understand these processes, it's hard to get things done. And you're not expected to become an expert in HR or budgeting or acquisitions, but you got to know enough to know that when that person's telling you something can't be done, that no, it could be done, but they might not be helping you on how you get there. So you have to understand enough. The people, I tell everybody, I hate people. People are a pain in the neck. Right? If it wasn't for people, there wouldn't be any problems. But unfortunately, the people are there. And you have to work with people, or else you can't get anything done. All right? I was an introvert. So you really have to learn to work with people, and that's where the interpersonal skills and communication skills and all that come into play. And then the politics, I'm not talking about, in DC, I'm not talking about the big P, the getting elected and all that. So I'm talking about the little P, right? And really, politics is you're getting to know the different people in your organization well enough so that you can get things done. And when you need to get things done, you go down the hall, you can talk to them, and they're willing to help you. So you're sort of building up those relationships. And somebody once said, if you're looking at somebody in the face, then they can't stab you in the back, right? So they're working with you, and you got to build up those relationships along the way. You can't wait till the moment you need to get something done, and now you're asking. So that's sort of the politics. You got to sort of feed that network along the way. So the 3 Ps are very important. And the technical, you're going to know the technical parts of your job. So you need to start looking at the 3 Ps. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, technical. All right. So everybody knows IQ is, right? And IQ used to be sort of the big thing. You got to be smart. But these days is not enough to be smart. You also need EQ. What's EQ? Emotional intelligence, right? And that's how you respond to people. That's how you respond to situations. And if you sort of go off the deep end, it is not a very good thing. You have to think about what's the best way to respond to this person in this situation. And that's the emotional intelligence. And then there's CQ. What's CQ? Cultural intelligence, right? When we talk about diversity, you got to understand the differences in a person. Why is that person quiet all the time? Why is that person, coming across a different way? And I think Laura Listwood, who wrote The Loudest Duck, is a diversity book called Loudest Duck. And I never, it's supposed to be a Chinese saying. I never heard of it. The saying is the loudest duck gets
shot.
See? I'm Chinese. I never heard of that. Right? But supposedly that's the saying. Now, the other saying is the nail that sticks out gets
Hammer.
Yeah, that one I've heard of. Right? And then the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Right? And then women are nice. What would you say?
Great.
Oh, nice and great. Right? So these are sort of very stereotypical cultural differences. And of course, like I said, you got to get down to the person. But if you look at the stereotypes and then you're in a meeting, right, and you have the duck, the wheel, the nail, and the nice all standing in a room, guess who's going to get our attention? The wheel, right? Because that's what they do. They squeak and then they get the attention. And if you don't realize that from a cultural intelligence perspective, you're the supervisor. You're going to keep letting the wheel talk, and you're going to keep listening to the wheel's ideas, and the other people are just going to sit there and they're quiet and they're waiting sort of for that 2 minutes of silence before they feel like they can jump in. And if the wheel isn't in the room, you're never going to get 30 seconds of silence. So those people are never going to jump in, and you're never going to hear their ideas. And then as a supervisor, you might think, oh, well, Sally wasn't very interested. She didn't even say anything in the meeting. She's not even into what we're doing. She had no ideas. If you realize, okay, well, Sally just may be quiet, and I need to call on Sally and ask her specifically and sort of draw that out of her versus letting Bill talk the whole time, right? Or I need to go to Sally either before and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. I'd like you to think about this and come prepare with some ideas. Or afterwards, hey, we had that discussion. Do you have any thoughts? So cultural intelligence, you got to work with different people differently, but you got to sort of understand the cultural differences first, right? So that's cultural intelligence. So if you have IQ, EQ, and CQ, so right in the middle there, you can be GQ right now. Never mind. All right, next slide. I'll keep this interesting. All right, so how do you get a promotion? You really have to take ownership of your career, right? Because if you're not looking out for yourself, there might be other people that are interested in looking out for you, but you're going to be the one that need to focus on your career, right? So you got to start looking at that and how do you advance in your career. Right, you got to remove your mental barriers. And I was just saying that I gave you sort of example of my path, and some people think, well, I can't do that, or I'm not good at that, or opportunity comes along, well, I'm not ready yet. Maybe I'll wait. I'll be ready in 3 months. Well, in 3 months, that opportunity may not be there. Right, so you got to get rid of those mental barriers that's holding yourself back. And nobody else can do that for you. You have to do it. All right. And I was talking about before, you got to step out of your comfort zone. It might feel uncomfortable, but guess what? That's how we grow. If we never get into any areas that we're not comfortable with, then we're not growing. All right. So you got to do that. And as I said, when you have a home base like I did in college, that helps a little bit. You sort of. When you're kids, you run around playing the tag, you get a home base, you run around and then you get a home base. All right, I'm safe. Right? So sometimes you need that safe zone, but you got to venture out. Speak up, get noticed. It's hard to get promoted if you're not noticed. All right? So as I say, I'm an introvert, but in meetings now, you can't shut me up. I'm always the one. I'm the squeaky wheel now. I'm always chiming in, whether it's sort of my area or not. I have ideas and I speak up, because if you don't, then people don't know your ideas, right? It doesn't matter how intelligent you are if you don't communicate your knowledge. People are not going to know, right? Or if you can't communicate your knowledge in a way that people understand, then people are not going to know. Ask what is required for promotion. And I know in the government is a little bit different. In the private sector, your supervisor can promote you just like that. In the government, there's some processes and procedures you got to follow. But still, even though those processes be followed, your supervisor still have to be interested in promoting you first before you even have a chance, right? Unless you go outside the organization. But when you ask the supervisor, it does two things. Right? Your supervisor may not know the answer right then and there because they haven't thought about it or they haven't been able to formulate it in such a way they can articulate it. By you asking them, it forces them to think about it. And then maybe a week later when you ask again, they have an answer. Right? Or if they already do and they haven't communicated to you, now they're telling you what their expectations are. Right? You can't meet somebody's expectations if you don't know what they are. Right, or as my wife with my kids, she's the tiger mom. So every time the kids meet expectations, she immediately raised the bar. So it's like impossible to reach. Right, but that's another issue. But it's good to know what the expectations are. Right, and then you can meet those. And then when you do meet those, you already had a conversation, and now you can say, all right, here's what we talked about, and guess what? I met those things. All right, so ask is very important. And then from that, and from the ECQs, develop a career plan. All right, where you are today and where you're going to go. Because if you don't have a plan, you might get somewhere, but it might not be where you want to go. So you have to think about where is it you want to go. And then apply for jobs. I say to people, just apply for jobs and go to interviews just for good measure, even if you're totally happy with where you are. Because you get to see what else is out there and what other people are looking for, and you get the practice interviewing. Even if you are not interested in any of those jobs, it's good practice. Good to see what else is out there and what the criteria are and what people are looking for. All right, but when you do apply for jobs, again in the government, sometimes it's very discouraging. Right? I've had jobs that I applied for 1 year later call me after I'm already working for the government. Say, hey, you apply for so and so job. And I get both. I would get, oh, we want you to come to the interview now. Or, sorry, you didn't make the final list. A year later, I'm like, who is this again? What agency? Right? But that's sort of the process, and you have to be persistent and just apply. If you really are looking for that next level, don't get discouraged, because a lot of times it's not because of you, it's because of the process that we have. All right, but be persistent. Promote your accomplishments. All right, if you do something great, you have to toot your own horn. If you don't, people may not notice. Okay. And I'll say, in my 9.5 years experience in government, say the one most important thing that I've learned: if you spend time on this one thing in a year, you should do this. And what is that? Any idea? Your self-assessment. Spend time on your self-assessment. Don't assume your supervisor is going to remember everything that you did throughout the year. All right, because they're going to forget. It's like the Academy Awards. Only the things you did in the last month are they going to remember. So you have to put that all on paper and in good, well-written fashion, because guess what? They're lazy and they're busy. So if they can just copy and paste it into your assessment, it's done. Right? Don't laugh.
No, that's what they do.
This is true. Right? So you have to, don't skimp on your self-assessment. Spend time on that. All right, I'm going to do one last slide. Know your organization. Oh, no. Okay. So if this is your typical organization and you are up there where it says you, and those are the people around you, who has to say yes for you to be promoted? Your boss. Well, your boss definitely, but essentially everybody has to say yes, or really not say no. Because if there's anybody in that picture that's, whispering to or just saying bad things about you, the chances of you getting promoted are diminished greatly. All right, and this is part of that sort of the quote-unquote politics. You're not out there politicking per se, but you have to know the people in the organization, and you got to basically not piss any of them off if you want to get promoted, because they will all have their circle and influence, and that may be enough for you not to get promoted. All right. So it's not just your boss. All right. So I'm all right. I'm going to stop there.